Always love that countdown music.
Me too. It's really calming.
That's what I was thinking too. Well, welcome to the Nancy Chu live stream where we talk about product management, leadership, and occasionally spirituality, and occasionally entrepreneurship. So today, I would like to welcome Sarin Selva back to my live stream. We did this once before, and we had so much fun. So we wanted to come together again, and this time we want to talk about peak performance using somatic techniques. And Sarin is a intuitive executive coach. I actually want to start this live stream with a little bit of vocabulary lesson because I feel like I just threw a lot of big words out there. So let's start with intuitive executive coach. What does that mean, Sarin?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, Nancy, thank you so much for having me back in. I love partnering with you, and I love the work that you're doing in the product management space. So thank you,
Thank you so much.
foremost, and I really appreciate it. Intuitive executive coach. So I'm an executive coach, former executive in the tech space, and long story short, I combine intuitive ability with coaching. And I have the certifications and the bells and whistles and everything on the business side, but there's an added layer of intuition that I bring to my work with people, which helps kind of speed up our understanding of the situation. I also encourage others to set out on their own intuitive path of unlocking the wisdom that they have within themselves.
Love that. That's something I've been intentionally working on in the last couple of years. And it really brings this element of ease and flow and grace with everything that I do. And I wish that it's something that I started cultivating years and years ago. But it's never too late to begin.
Never too late to begin. All you have to do is just start listening to the inside.
Always. So let's move on with our vocabulary lesson. Peak performance. What does that mean?
Peak performance to me isn't just the physical pressure of pushing yourself to do something like an athlete.
Mhm.
It's also a state, and I think you just used the word grace and also the word flow, which is when we feel connected to our work, when we feel passionate about our work, when we're enjoying our work.
Yes.
That is a peak state because we know we're at our very best, and there's really nowhere to go but up from there.
Absolutely.
Just that physical effort of I've got to work all night and da 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 da.
Yeah.
How are you managing your physical self through that?
Love that. And our final vocabulary lesson for the day, somatic. What does that mean?
Somatic stems from the Latin word soma, which means the body. Somatic to me, and there are many definitions, but really it's about of the body. And so we think about it in a leadership context. It's how are we physically showing up, mentally showing up, and intuitively showing up to work, and having all of those states be fulfilled in order to achieve peak performance.
Why is it so hard to focus on the body in today's world when everything is high stress, whether you're in tech or not in tech, whether you're in a leadership role or not, it's just always stressful.
We, in modern society, we live a very stressful world. We've made it more and more complex with technology. I am not against technology, so we're not sitting in for that lesson today. But I do think that we're mostly operating from our headspace, right? And we're also getting pinged by devices and pinged by people and pinged by apps. And so the mind just kind of guides the whole process. And so that leaves our own inner wisdom, our intuition, our gut knowing, and our physical body kind of to the side. It's the thing that sometimes you forget you got to go to the bathroom, right? You're really intensely working on something, or you forget to breathe. Maybe you're holding your breath on a conference call. Those things are happening unconsciously while you're working.
Yeah.
So the brain kind of runs away with everything. And so I think the challenge is how do we bring ourselves back to our body in a world that is highly complex.
Love that framing. Also, we have James from our network chiming in.
Hi,
James says, I love the framing of peak performance here. Yes, me too. Me too. It's not just about being physical.
No, and it's not about this blunt force. I feel like the way I was conditioned was kind of blunt force. And I think we're kind of waking up from that. And I'm happy to work with people like you and to kind of shepherd through a new way of working that will still get to our goals. Right.
I love that you mentioned conditioning. Do you think that conditioning started in school or it started when we started working?
I think there's two kinds of conditioning in my world, and it's opinion. But the first conditioning is when years before I was born, when the manufacturing process for automobiles started, and we took that model of how cars are made and we applied it to people. And it's like, well, yeah, it works awesome for a factory, but that became the work style philosophy for how we work. And I don't think it's no one's fault, but we haven't really questioned kind of that
It's
we're
not
not.
changed either.
It has not changed. It has not evolved yet. I do think that on the positive, with everything that's been changing so much since COVID, especially, I think there's an opportunity for us to reframe how we work. But the second part of your question is the conditioning piece, personal conditioning. I grew up in an era where it was definitely, especially as a woman,
Yeah.
um, if you want the brass ring, you better be ready to work like a factory robot. Um, it's a little bit of a just kind of funny thing, but I remember the intensity of those days. I
Is
started
it
my career in the .com boom.
is it possible to
Yeah,
just continue doing things the old way?
sure.
What
Uh,
happens if we just continue?
well, I'll speak from personal experience. It can affect your health.
Mhm.
I think many of the people in my colleagues, a lot of them have had health issues. The stress over a long period of time is dangerous. And when I first heard that, I was like, yeah, but not for me. Like, I'm a hard worker. I'm smart. Like, that's not going to happen to me. That's for other people who can't handle it. And the reality is the body, whether you're aware of it or not, is still pushing itself, and it's still in a locked stress state. And when you come out of that, that's when ailments and things start to happen. And obviously, for anyone that's listening to this, I don't want that to happen to you. I will say that. I don't know you, and I don't want that to happen to you.
You use the word or the judgment, "You can't handle it," or "You're not cut out for it." And I
Mhm.
think that's just one example of how we're conditioned to feel that there's something wrong if we can't continue this way because then we feel like we're judged, that we're
Mhm.
not cut out for it. We're not good enough for this high stress, high ambition environment. But that's just conditioning.
It's just conditioning. I was listening to the cast of SNL a couple of weeks ago. There was an
Mhm.
interview with some of the stars from SNL, and they were talking about the crazy pace of how they produce. And a few of them are no longer cast members. And they were like, I couldn't keep up with that constant pace that was expected of me. I was starting to break down. My family life was starting to go. Like, so, it's not, by no means am I trying to make people feel afraid here. That's why we're talking about awareness of the
Right.
body, right? Because there's so much potential for you to work the way you want and just be
Yeah.
conscious of some things that can help your stress.
But the whole framing, I have a problem with the framing. I can't keep up. Again, that it's like blaming our bodies to not meet certain standards, but the standard was not perfect to begin with.
The standard was not perfect to begin with, and the message of work at all costs
Yeah.
is not one that is of compassion and empathy. Then that's what bothers me, I think, on a personal note. Right? We have to have compassion for ourselves and have compassion for each
Yes.
other, right?
Also recognize that culturally speaking, we we think that being busy is good.
Hmm.
We think that being stressed out is a good problem to have.
Yeah.
We think that, oh, if I'm stressed or oh, if I'm so busy, then we must be doing something
Right.
good. Right?
Right.
We equate that with, okay, we're doing what we're supposed to do.
I'm going somewhere,
Yeah.
right? I'm doing something.
Otherwise, we think that we're being lazy,
Mhm.
and society doesn't think that that's good.
Our culture is definitely productivity at all costs, even with our children.
Yeah.
Right? You need to be doing this, you need to be doing this, you need to be doing this activity, right? And like sometimes the kid's like, I just want to sit in the corner and like hang out with my blocks or like paint or whatever. And we're like, no, you got to learn something.
Yes.
Which is a little bit of a different conversation just around play and how that informs work, which is a whole nother.
Yeah, we could do another live stream on that one.
We
So
could.
when we focus on the body and not just the mind, what does that actually mean? And do we know how to do that?
We're not really trained to do that once we
Yeah.
get to the workforce. Everyone's upbringing is different, right? But we're not really trained. So what that looks like is kind of cultivating some time for self-awareness. Whenever I start talking to people about self-awareness, they go, I meditate or I journal. That's not really what I'm talking about.
Mm.
What I'm talking about is kind of slowing down. Like you and I are having a conversation right now. I might pause in that conversation and just check in with my body. Right?
What does that mean, check in with my body?
So what I do is I just kind of feel where my energy is. So right now I'm speaking, so I feel a little energy here. I check to make sure my feet are on the floor so that I'm grounded, right? Listen to my own voice. Like, is it measured? Is it going fast? Am I leaning forward? And there's no good or bad around that. It's an awareness. Like right now, I'm where my hand is in front of my face. Like, am I slowed down enough? And the other thing that's a benefit of that is it gives time for your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex to catch up. So if you were really charged and having a conversation with somebody, you can just slow and become aware of your body.
Yeah.
Your thoughts can catch up with your drive.
I think we need to do another vocabulary lesson. What is the amygdala?
Oh, the amygdala is a part of the brain. It's from our original evolution. It's tied very closely to the fight or flight response. Sometimes when you get very emotionally charged, it's known as an amygdala hijack. Which is when your amygdala, I call it the lizard part of your brain, like when you were evolving.
It's
Your
the
lizard
emotional part of the brain.
like, so for example, if you're in a car with somebody on a road trip and you get really hungry, all of a sudden you go, I'm really hungry. Sometimes that could be like your amygdala just going, you got to feed me. I'm still a thinking, breathing, living being, right? And I'm committed to where we're going in the car, but my amygdala is like, this woman needs to be fed, right? So what we're talking about is slowing down to give ourselves a chance to think and be aware of our own physical presence.
What is the prefrontal cortex?
This is the part of your brain that my dog says you make a lot of decisions from. Oh, that dog. So it's the part of our brains that evolved.
Let's give Soren's dog a second to.
She's just very vocal. That's Ziggy. Ziggy's responding to an amygdala hijack. She sees something out the window, but she doesn't have a prefrontal cortex, probably, maybe a small one, sorry. And so her lizard brain is like running over to the window to check on, like, are we safe?
Yeah, are we safe?
Actually, thank you, Ziggy. That's actually a really good example of she just runs in and she assumes that she's being attacked, right?
So what does it mean to let the prefrontal cortex catch up or to let the amygdala catch up? What does that mean?
So basically is that your primal instincts align to the thinking part of your brain. So your primal need, for example, say you're having a stressful conversation, you really want to control that conversation. Right? You're amped up and you're like, God damn it, like this is my meeting, right? When you slow down, your prefrontal cortex can say, okay, this is an important meeting. And yeah, I am nervous about losing control of the meeting, but I know that there are implications if I behave in a way that is not acceptable.
Yeah.
Now, we're all human, and I have, as I mentioned, a lot of compassion for people. Sometimes there's times when the amygdala does take over. Like if you're really stressed, so that's kind of why we want to incorporate somatics into our leadership.
Let's talk about what that actually means. So, how does reframing our challenges at work change our physical response to stress? And can you guide us through a simple reframing exercise?
So, everything that I preach, teach with leadership around somatics is it is the slowing down, but that starts with the noticing. So depending on the heat of what's happening with the other party, and this can be used at home too, frankly, just taking a minute to feel back into the room because what can happen is we can get caught in a narrative.
Yeah.
They're out to get me. They're going to ask questions I can't answer. What you name it, like whatever
Mhm.
it is. It could be something small that bothers you.
Yeah.
I missed that one detail in the Excel sheet, and someone's going to point that out. My numbers aren't right. All that noise needs to be slowed down so that you can respond appropriately. So a
Mm.
simple reframe might be that and how I'll do it is through a physical, right? It's just to kind of stop for a minute. Now you don't want to make it obvious to other people sometimes, depending on the relationship that you're doing that. But what I'll
Oh,
do,
you could do this with other people around you. Is that
yeah,
what you mean?
yeah.
Okay. Ooh.
Like sometimes you can't get away, right?
Yeah.
You're on a Zoom and it's with your boss. So I'll tell people to just become aware of the room. So that doesn't mean you have to do this if you're on a group call, but you can kind of just look up and maybe look at something. And I'm looking at a plant right now in my office, and
Okay.
just take a look at the plant, and just what that does
Mm.
is that it reminds the body that you're safe. Your
Mm.
brain knows, your prefrontal cortex knows you're safe,
But
but
it's turned off in that moment.
yes, and the heat of the moment
Yeah.
creates a disconnection from that part of your brain, and then you forget, and then you just like Ziggy, you just bark. You're like, ah, right?
Yeah.
So one technique that I would use is to just kind of sometimes I'll have people just feel their feet on the floor. So for
Mm.
example, I was coaching a woman last week, and the conversation, her voice started out very normal, but about 5 minutes in, her breath started sounding funny to me, and her
Mm.
voice started escalating, and the voice started getting a little raggedy. And I was like, she is stressed out about this topic, promotion and raise topic.
Mm.
So I just said to her, let's just take a minute because we're in a coaching dynamic. And I
Yeah.
just take a minute, just breathe.
And it's a safe environment.
Yes, absolutely. So just to be safe and just kind of take that breath, gather, feel the feet on the floor. Sometimes if you're in a conference room,
Mm.
one thing you can do is you can kind of, sometimes I'll just have people just do a twist, like a
Oh,
stretch, like that. And that actually activates one of your vagal nerves.
what does
And
that mean? Let's do another vocabulary lesson.
so there's a nerve in your body called your vagus nerve,
Mhm.
vagus,
Mm.
and that can promote that feeling promotes relaxation, that nerve. So when we twist, we're activating that relaxation nerve in the body.
Oh, interesting.
And it does not create, people won't wonder what you're doing. They'll just think you're stretching because you're in a long meeting or something. Right? Just do a little bit
Love that. Subtle. That I love that subtlety.
and if you're in a different kind of meeting, you can also say, let's just take a breath, let's take a pause here. You could also say that,
Mm.
right? Depending on the nature of the relationships that you have. You can just say, let's just hang out for a second. Let's get some tea, let's get some water, or the food's coming in. Let me
Okay.
go see where the food is, right? If it's a catered thing or something. Just get up and move, right? Because that's the ideal situation is that you could just get up and move and
So
leave
you want to move your body
in
in
some
that
way.
moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like for this is just my eyes looking at the plant and then just kind of remembering where I am. Look at my computer.
Okay.
It's to knock you out of that stress state.
Mm.
That's what we're doing. We're
Yeah.
telling lizard part of our brain, the amygdala, that I'm safe.
Yeah.
I'm not out in the woods starving for food, whatever happened to us biologically many years ago. Uh, I'm safe. And
Mhm.
then you can come back to the conversation and be engaged. It's like you had a mini pause in the middle of the
How
conversation.
long does it take to turn off the amygdala?
It depends on the level of
Mm.
stress.
Mm.
So if it's uncomfortable and someone's irritating you, maybe it's just you're going to look at the plant for a minute, formulate a breath, and then just be like, okay, so what I think, pivot. Now, if it's really out of control or
Yeah.
someone else is being out of control, you can say, you know what, I'm just going to go grab a quick glass of water.
Okay.
Or, you know what, I hear the phone ringing. If you're not on Zoom, I hear the phone ring, or I got to get a package.
So you need to interrupt
You need to interrupt some
the flow.
and stay in flow.
Okay.
Right? Because and I notice sometimes what I'll do subconsciously is I'll just start rubbing my right arm.
What does that mean? What does that do to the body?
And for a long time, I know why I was rubbing my right arm unconsciously, but I was self-soothing,
Oh.
right? In discussion, because I'm like, oh, I must not like what's happening because I need some soothing or what I'm hearing. So it's tapping in to get to Uber kind of question. It's tapping into what the body is telling us and then feeding it what it needs, which is a pause.
What does the pause do? So it turns off the amygdala and then
Slows the brain down
Mhm.
so you can think strategically about how you want to answer the question.
Mm. And that's because there's only one part of the brain that could be on at a time. So if your amygdala is on, then your prefrontal cortex is not on. And so when your emotions are on, you can't think.
Yes.
And when you're being logical, you're not being emotional. So only one part of the brain is on.
Right. And when we have big decisions to make personally or professionally, or we're in a big presentation where our career is like the promotion is riding on it,
Yeah.
emotional awareness is and emotional and physical awareness is so key. I think that is the number one thing I'm working on with the women that I coach right now.
Mhm.
People do kind of a couple things. They'll shove it down and then they'll get kind of short in their responses, or they'll just keep shoving it down until they break later,
Yeah.
right? Because they won't verbalize their frustration, or they'll just cry. I was talking to a colleague in the financial services space who leads a large team, and she was telling me she has a couple of employees who are very emotional. Now, I'm not here to tell anybody the emotions are a bad thing,
Yeah.
but it is true in what you said, Nancy, that you can't have both going at the same time
Yeah.
without some level of awareness.
Yeah.
And the cues are in the body.
Mm.
And so we have to start becoming attuned to what our body is telling us.
What
And
are
that's
some examples of the signals that our bodies sending?
sweaty,
Sweat, okay.
sweaty, uh, red, like I'm on a call right now. I'm not afraid to say I get a little red when I'm on a call.
Are
A
you
little
stressed out
nervous.
right now?
I'm not stressed out, but my body's like, it's got to be good. You got to do a good job here. I'm not going to lie. I'm
Well, I
very,
mean, it's a live stream, so it's a little
yeah,
bit stressful.
so it's transparent.
Okay.
I'd like to say it was a sunburn, but it's not. So there's two.
Okay.
Voice, right? Like, is your responses very like staccato? Like, how does your voice sound? Right? Is it like
Okay.
soft? Hi, Nancy, or is it? We really have to get this done, right?
And everyone's bodies will respond differently.
Absolutely.
So the call to action here is you got to know your body. You got to recognize
Mhm,
how you respond,
mhm.
and that might look differently for different people.
Absolutely. Like some people really will clench. Sometimes I'll be on a call with someone and I'll be like, "Are you holding space? Are you holding? Are you tense right now?
You mean like,
Holding in your body?" And they'll be like, "Yeah, my stomach's really tight." I'm like, "Okay, well, can we release that?"
okay,
Or I'll say like, "Where do you feel that emotion?" Uh,
okay.
so there's actually a whole separate web call on that, but
Another live stream on
there's
that.
a whole book on uncoding your body, like based on
Yeah.
the sensations you get and where they live.
Okay.
If you really want to nerd out, you can do that.
So step 1 is to notice these sensations in the body that
Yeah.
don't feel good, that don't feel natural. It feels a little bit foreign. Like if I had to explain how I interpret it, it's a foreign feeling that's not supposed to be in the body.
Yes.
And when I detect this feeling in the body, then I know to do something about it
Mm-hmm.
because it's not supposed to be here. That means I'm out of my flow state.
Mm-hmm.
So that's step 1. It's like a physical thing.
It's a physical thing. Yeah.
And then is there a mental thing that we could do with the reframing?
I think the physical like movements that I was talking about really get at it very quickly to kind of neutralize the mind.
Okay.
Because if I had to draw a picture of the mind at that point, I would say it's like a bunch of crazy squiggly lines.
Mm.
So I don't know if it's receptive yet to listening.
Oh, that's true
So
because
the
we can't
body's
think
like,
at that moment.
yes.
Okay.
The next time someone gets mad, I hope not soon, just kind of watch their body and what's happening, or even within yourself. Like what do you notice? And it can be you can do that in your personal relationships or with your daughter. Maybe you're really mad about something that's not happening. You're like, okay, I got to slow down.
Is
She's
that why certain kids stomp their feet when they're mad?
Mhm.
And my kid just gets really tense.
she's when kids stomp their feet, they're off discharging energy. They're discharging their anger
Oh,
because
into the ground.
necessarily empowered like when you have a mom and dad, like they're calling the shots, right? And so I have a client who told me not too long ago that when she didn't like what her mom was doing,
Yeah.
she would hold her breath and she would faint quite often.
Oh my
She was
gosh.
so mad that she would just pass out. So she'd be bottling it up. And then her mom was always like, oh my gosh, this kid just like knocks herself out all the time.
Oh my gosh, that is pretty extreme.
And it's same for humans. Like the energy has to go somewhere.
Yes. Okay. I love that interpretation of kids stomping their feet. It releases some of the tension. I'm gonna try that next time, actually. I won't be like,
Go
huh.
for it. Go for it. There's a whole slew of exercises that I teach around that as well. And I actually I work with a somatic practitioner.
Okay.
And sometimes things are hard. You need to punch it out, or you need to yell into a pillow. That's what that's for. So if you're
Mhm.
working from home and a meeting doesn't go well, maybe in between meetings, go and do a release, right?
Jumping jacks?
Stomp, walk,
Yeah.
yell,
Yeah.
whatever, depending on how bad it is
Yeah.
and what works for you. Maybe you're like, I never yell. Why would I yell? I'm not a yelly person. Okay, well, it could be something else.
Right. It
Right?
means that when there is additional energy in the body that is not serving you, we need to release it.
Mm-hmm.
And the call to action here is really just notice when you're feeling these sensations, and you are invited to find ways to release those energies in a way that works for you.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically the call to action here.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Now, moving forward from there, imagine you're in back to back meetings. Let's say a
Mhm.
5 hour block of back to back meetings. Yes, I'm not a fool. I know that happens and people have, that's how it is, right? However, what kind of pause are you building? Like if you
Right.
have a bad meeting and then you go into another one and you're upset from the first one, how are you going to show up,
Right.
right?
You're taking that energy with you.
How can you discharge that energy so that you can continue?
I love that. They don't teach this in school.
They do not teach it in school.
They should.
They should. And I think that's why kids have playtime and that's why they're encouraged to run around, right? That's what recess is. We
Yeah.
don't really get recess. So we have to create our recess in an adult appropriate way,
We
right?
should have recesses.
I think exercise is our recess,
Yeah.
which is kind of not great because there's no pancakes involved with recess.
Yeah.
Like with recess. So
I love that. We talked about noticing energy building up in our bodies and feeling these sensations are not positive. Now, what happens when we um, when we sense that we might be picking up energy from other people, or maybe the energy of the room is just so dense that we can't help but
yeah,
be part of that?
yeah.
That's where we need to start setting some boundaries.
You start setting boundaries and just be aware of the fact that energy transfers. So you know the old saying of like misery loves company,
Yes.
and you're like, I don't want to be around XYZ because they're a lot for me.
Hmm.
That's a lot. And maybe you're like, well, they're not saying much, and it's their presence.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean they're wrong or bad, but it
Hmm.
also doesn't mean that you need to take it on and eat it with a spoon and enjoy it
Hmm.
because it's their situation, it's their energy. Or
Yeah.
say the CEO comes down and says we've got to have budget cuts, and he or she can kind of be scary, right? That there's energy coming out.
Yeah.
Well, how do
So
we manage that?
how well, first of all, that means we have to know what our limits are.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we once we know what the limit is, then we could set boundary. How does that work?
So it works very similarly than what I described, which everything kind of starts with a self awareness and creating time and space to be able to tap into yourself and to be able to just check in and be like, okay, how am I receiving? It takes time.
Mhm.
How am I receiving this information from this person? And
Yeah.
do I need to ingest that? I can still be helpful with this
Yeah.
person, but I don't need to ingest everything that's going on into the cells of my body.
Mm.
So, how to manage that For me, it's unconscious or it's conscious at this point, but it's just I will sometimes say to myself, that's their story,
Yes. Love that.
that's their situation.
Yeah.
What's going on underneath what they're saying?
Mm.
How is what they're saying making me feel? Do I feel stressed? Do I
Mhm.
feel hot? Do I feel like I want to get up and leave? Am I holding my breath? Am I
Yeah.
clenching my gut? And can I just release that for a minute and then listen to them?
Also recognize that everyone projects onto others.
Yes.
And so what they are experiencing in that moment, they might just be projecting onto you.
Yes.
And it's really just about them, it's not about you.
Yes. And they're doing that energetically. And what do I mean by that? Through atoms, right? It's all we can't see it, but it is scientific
Yeah.
of itself. There are atoms being let go of in your direction that are part of that energetic charge. The
Mhm.
same charge that we're talking about when the kid stomps his feet,
Yeah.
or when I get sweaty and I feel like I can't say anything, I might feel kind of choked here. Like, and we have a choice, and we don't realize that we have a choice to not ingest that.
To not take it on, right? That's
Correct.
what it means.
Yes, to not take, you don't need to take on their energetic charge. If you're part of the team and they're having a problem, yes, we're supposed to work together, we're supposed to help each other. But helping each other doesn't necessarily mean taking on that same stress, pain, anger, confusion, you name it, that's going on. We want to be able to slow ourselves down and listen for what's really happening.
Does it mean that there there's still there is a way to be helpful without making someone else's problem your own problem?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is. And depending on the nature of the relationship, I think that has a piece of it as to how much we take on. But there's a somatic and energetic quality to what's happening. And my hope is that, even in this conversation today, that people understand you don't need to meet them where they are at that anger,
Mhm.
right? And I know that sounds like duh. However, when we're in a situation and the amygdala is responding, your lizard brain is responding to what's saying, because if the CEO or someone's angry, that can come in like a threat response, right?
Yes.
We don't need to catch on to the threat piece. We need to just listen to what needs to be done. And we can't do that if we're in an amped state.
I have an example, where I feel like I might be making someone else's problem my problem, but it's kind of a fine balance because as a product manager, you you try you try to move fast.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was my QA person forgot about something. It's been a long time, so I can't remember the details, but my QA person either forgot something or didn't do what they said that they were going to do, but I was very affected by it. As in, I felt that it was my fault for not reminding them.
Mm-hmm.
I felt that I could have done something, and I let it consume me for like a whole day.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really bothering me. And I went to my VP at the time and I apologized for not staying on top of this. And he was like, but it's not even your problem. But then I felt like it was my problem.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a fine line that sometimes it's hard for some people when we feel a lot of ownership, and but everyone has their own roles and responsibilities. And I just at that time, I didn't have the right tools to create that boundary.
Yeah, and when we're high achievers, we care a lot.
Mhm.
We care a lot. And I think the question is like, how can we care without
Yeah.
letting it physically consume us, which
Yes.
then puts us in a stress state, which then makes us sick.
Right. And when my VP said, "But that's not even your issue," I actually in that moment, I actually didn't think that he got me. As in, "What do you mean it's not it's my It's my responsibility. Like, I should have been on top of this, blah, blah, blah. But what I realized, what he meant was because I was so consumed by this
Mm-hmm.
failure, because we had to delay our launch or whatever it was, I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do. I had my own things that I needed to do. That was the next, basically the next deliverable. But instead of focusing on what I needed to do, I was consumed by this thing that happened in the past. And I was like, oh, I should have done this. Blah, blah, blah. That's what he meant by it.
And that takes from your ability to perform
Yes.
at peak states.
Yes. Even though it was me trying to perform, it was me trying to be responsible, but by being consumed by someone else's problem, it was preventing me from doing what I needed to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Affected your productivity, sounds like for a whole day.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. So it doesn't serve anyone to
Mm-mm.
take on other people's issues.
And I think our thinking brain knows that, but our physical body and our amygdala, like we talked about earlier, they take over.
Yeah.
And so in the moment, another way that could have gone is you felt bad about it,
I felt bad. Yes.
able to release it.
Yeah.
And if that person reported to you, you could then go and give that sort of compassion to them as well, right? Which is
Mhm.
okay. Because I think what happens physically, and at least in my experience, is that that guilting and that shame and
Yes.
disappointment compounds, and then you can't think straight about what you
Right.
need to do. It's like, oh my God, like this thing got horrible. And it's
Yeah.
like, what are some ways in the moment to discharge that, right?
Yes. I mean, there's some value in reliving the past so that we can learn from it, but we can't be stuck there.
We can't be stuck
So it's the act of just balance the learnings so that we can move on from it.
there. Hmm.
I love that.
And how can we calm our nervous system down, right? And then when that woman or man came to you and said, I missed my QA date, what was the energetic charge they were giving off? And how can you keep that from absorbing into your own space?
No, it's funny that now that I'm thinking back, that person didn't really feel anything. They're just like, I missed it. I'm feeling all these feelings. Like,
You're like,
yeah.
so it was mostly your experience. You were like, what is happening?
I must be projecting onto this myself. Yeah.
Yeah,
So interesting. I have one last question for you.
absolutely.
You have a special technique called the three wisdoms technique. Tell us more about what that means.
So my belief, as I said at the top of the call, is that most of us operate here. We operate with our mind. Our mind is like everything to us.
Hmm.
But we are whole human beings with such sophistication in the human body that we're not tapping into. I tell people most of the time, when you're just operating with your intellect, you're leaving all of your other innate wisdom on the table. It's not coming to work with you. So what is the wisdom of the body, right? So how do we align our intellect to what our body's telling us? So for example, you've got a hire who looks great on paper. You go and interview them and you're like, something doesn't seem right. Like, I don't know. But you go for it anyways because they look great on paper.
Because there's no data to prove the gut feeling.
There's no data to prove your intuition. And then 6 months later, you're like, why did we hire that person? They're terrible. Right. So we're discounting our own innate wisdom that we were born into this world with. And you can take it from me, you can take it from Steve Jobs, who operated from a very intuitive space, right? And so what I believe in is really bringing all of these wisdoms to bear, right? So just making sure that we're using our thinking mind, all the expertise, our academic experience, everything that we've learned and known, everything that helps us today to do a great job. And then we're going to tap in our body and be like, how can I be a better leader and work with my body? Am I stressed? Like, how can I discharge that, not make it obvious to other people? And then lastly, sorry, the gut knowing element is the intuition piece. So, what I suggest for strong leaders is to align all of these things and to not have a dog that is just using her amygdala brain to answer everything.
Does intuition live in the body?
I don't know, does it?
Does it live in the brain?
I don't know where it lives.
Mm.
It's got very mysterious qualities, and there are a lot of different versions about where it came from. But I believe it's this inner wiring that we have. And it's often poo pooed because there's no data behind
Right.
it. Da, 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 da. And I'm like, we could get very caught up in that whole conversation. We can just say, sometimes my gut tells me things, and when I follow that, hey, guess what? It turns out a little better. Looks like David has a question.
Yes. Let me bring that up. Hi, David. Thank you for chiming in and leaving us with your question. How could you find this rebalance in a physical meeting? What technique applies if you're the center of attention and you find out you're not balanced?
That's a great question. I would maybe so some of the things I talked about earlier. So if I was presenting what I might do like I'm right now, how might I balance my energy? Can you take a minute to just kind of check in? You could also ask a question. Are we good on time? As you're asking that question, just like, am I stressed? You have to be kind of a detective on yourself and kind of just notice. And that's the self-awareness piece, right? So rebalancing for me, I might put my feet on the floor and I like to rub them back and forth on the floor. The technique of kind of looking at the room as if you're pondering and just getting the breath caught up to where we are, right? And just be like, okay, so where we are today, right? Find a place to insert a pause. I've been known in presentations to even have a piece of text in a document that says pause here, right? To force some sort of pause. But a question is a good way. The twist that I mentioned earlier, just a gentle twist. I'm just doing a little stretch. No one needs to know why you're stretching. And it's not going to be obvious to them. It's obvious to you, you're like, what am I doing? They know I'm trying to relax. No, they don't. They're thinking about what they're going to say in the meeting. They're thinking about what they're doing. They're not noticing that you're just gently checking the room to just make sure that you're anchored back to your body. So there's some ways. I hope that answers.
I have one thing to add, which is it is okay to take up space. It is okay to pause. One of my clients actually said to me, they followed my content from maybe a year ago, and they noticed that I am I'm comfortable being a slow speaker, and that comes from being okay with taking up space. Sometimes it's hard,
Mm-hmm.
and that echoes what Sarin just said. Sometimes you just have to pause, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I took a course from a leader in product management, and he had these Q&A sessions. And in the Q&A, he didn't just answer you right away. He actually took the time to think after every single question. And it felt like he took a long time. And he either had a clicker or a pen in his hand. And all you heard is this clicking when he was thinking. And when he was thinking, he would just look down and you hear the click. And you're like, when is he going to answer this question? But that's a demonstration of taking up space to think and recollect and just rebalance your whole system. And that's okay.
That's okay. And a way that we can help each other is by being graceful and honoring when somebody needs a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's brain works differently. I'm a very quick processor. Other people are slow processor. Have you ever been in a situation where you ask them a question, they go, that's a really good question, Nancy. They're doing that either subconsciously
They're
or
buying time. Yeah.
give space so that their prefrontal cortex can answer the question, right?
Yes.
So yes, absolutely. My hope for us is that as a community is really to allow people to have the space because we
Mm-hmm.
don't process the same. We are not machines, and to use some of these tools. And if
Even
you're,
machines need time to process information.
everyone needs time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of information coming at us
Yes.
all the time, 24/7. And I'm not saying that's bad or that needs to change, But what I am saying is there's opportunity for us to adapt to it in a way that works with our own innate strengths.
I have one more thing to add, and because I've been intentionally trying to be more self-aware, now I could now it's very clear to me when I can sense that I've been sprinting and moving really fast for, let's say, hours at a time, and I just need to slow down. And that's where my body feels like I just have to meditate.
Mhm.
It's that feeling. And I've gotten a lot better at it now versus, let's say, a year ago.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. Yes, now it's like I have to just stop and meditate.
For me, I like to go in my hammock. I have a hammock outside. And
Yeah.
so when I'm in between calls, if I get really stressed out or charged, I get up, just kind of tend to my body. What do I need? Okay, I need a little bit of water, I need a little snack. Then I just go out and just swing in that hammock, even if it's for like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And it just is like, oh yeah, this is my whole life. And work is a piece of that. Right. Yeah. Hammock isn't convenient for everybody that's who's listening, but make do with what you have.
Yeah.
And I have one last technique that is very quick, but if you get very, very stressed out and you're on a call and you're at home, what you can do after the call
Mm.
is you can lay on the floor. Lay on the floor on your back. Do nothing. Just lay on because what that is, it's very grounding. What does that mean?
Grounding.
It just brings that energy down out of the brain and down to the ground. So you can just be like, okay. It'll also tells your nervous system you can
You can
relax.
relax now.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try that next time. I'm
Yeah.
gonna meditate while laying down on the
Yeah.
ground.
Yeah. Lay down, just connect to the ground, connect to the ground, wherever that looks like. For some people it's grass, some people it's a hardwood floor. It
Yeah,
doesn't matter.
love
Uh,
that.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Sarin, for doing this with me again. Madhu says, nice session, very useful. Thank you so much, Madhu, for chiming in and joining us today. And of course, thank you to David for
Thank you,
raising your
David.
question. Well, thank you so much, Sarin. Oh, wait. I'm gonna put your QR code on the screen again. I forgot about this. So, folks, if you want to work more with Sarin, here's a QR code, and you can find her on her website at sarinsilva.com. Until next time, see
Take
you.